The theme of my speech today was the impossible. It was living the impossible dream. Because it's the #1 quote that I get when we do diversity work, and we do diversity work all around the world. People saying, well, what you're dealing with is impossible. You're never going to get rid of racism. You're not going to get rid of sexism. You know? It's impossible. And so this theme of this notion of the impossible and this theme of living Dr. King's dream is something that I really want to talk about, this notion of the impossible. So I want to talk from the perspective of, I guess, 4 rules or 4 guidelines of living the impossible dream. And I should say before I move into those 4 rules, talk a little bit about my background. And for those of you that were in the Montgomery County speech, I talked a little bit about this already. But I came to this work not necessarily from an occupational or an educational perspective. It was because I lived a lot of these issues. So as the mayor says, I was born in England, but I was brought up as a Jamaican. I was brought up in the Jamaican culture. So here I was, this little kid, living in England in the Jamaican culture, and I would go to school when I was around 4 or 5 years old, and I would have a different lunch, so all these kids would laugh at my lunch, and so I dealt with issues of culture relatively early. And then at 7, we moved to Canada. So here I was with this transplanted Jamaican kid with a British accent living in the middle of Canada. And that was interesting because, in grade 5 I would stand up and talk, and all these kids would laugh at my accent. And so I lost my accent in about a year and a half. And then when I was around 13 years old, I realized that girls actually liked British accents, but by that time it was all gone. But I dealt with issues around linguistic differences. And then as I got a little bit older in my teens, my mom started to lose her sight. And over a 2-year period, she lost her sight in both eyes. And I dealt with issues of disability. And as I got a little bit older, I was the first kid in my family to graduate from university. And I noticed the different ways people responded to me when I had a university degree versus when I didn't have a degree, especially when I dealt with a graduate degree. And I noticed that, issues of credentials started to show up. And I got married, and we had my first child, Alex, and we became a dual-learning family. And, I didn't know if Janice was going to pick him up or if I was going to pick him up. And I started to see the attitudes people had to me towards at work when I had to leave right at 5 o'clock, and people started to question my commitment at work. So I dealt with issues as it related to what we call maternalism and paternalism. And then as I got a little bit older, I was the first one in my family to go through divorce. And I was a single dad for a while. And I noticed the attitudes people had to me just in my own